Hello and welcome to ToutSuite.com and the ToutSuite Social Club. We've got a wonderful night. We're going to be hanging out with a wonderful winemaker here talking about Bordeaux blends and drinking an amazing vertical of red wine. And my name is Sean Quinn, and I work with the Napa Valley Film Festival. I'm their wine program director. And this gentleman right next to me is Steve Kent Mirassou. Yes, Mirassou. He is a sixth generation winemaker. This guy's family has been making wine for more years than the people.
Long time.
Yeah, a long time. And he's been nice enough to
showing every year right now too.
Showing every year. That's right, because 2007 was your first vintage. So we've got the 7, 8, 9, and 10. So we're really going to take a project that you've been working on from its root and see how it's progressing, and then talk even a little bit more about where you see its future. You and I talked a little bit earlier about where the 2013 vintage has gone for you guys. Now that we're just coming out of vintage, guys like you and I are actually getting to sleep more than 4 hours in a night, so we're really excited about that. So we're hoping we got a lot of people logging on tonight. It's just going to be great time, tasting some great wines. We've got some wonderful people here to share the wines with us. So thank you for being here, and welcome to ToutSuite Social Club. So let's start off. We got 4 wines in front of us, and we've got 4 bottles in front of us. What wine are we drinking?
This is Lineage Livermore Valley. This is a proprietary Bordeaux blend that is sort of a separate brand. I have a Livermore Valley Cabernet house called Steven Kent Winery. That's our Cabernet house. And in 2007, as you know, as a winemaker, another great vintage.
Oh yeah,
a special vintage in terms of quality. We had just enough fruit that it made it a beautiful year to try to do something that kind of brought me full circle as far as winemaking was concerned. And from the 2007 vintage, we were able to cull, I think it was 5 barrels of all 5 of the grapes, Cabernet dominant, 75% Cab, as a way of really kind of throwing the gauntlet down, basically.
Okay.
We'll talk more, I'm sure, about Livermore Valley's history and the like.
Definitely.
But the goal is to try to make one of the great red Bordeaux blends of the world. That's the ultimate goal of Lineage. And based upon Livermore Valley's history, where it's been, where it is now, and where it can go, I think that it's more about not screwing up in the cellar than it is about, do we have the right growing area to try this.
So you guys believe what climate and what you have to work with is really what's going to make Livermore great?
I do. Livermore was great. Before Prohibition, it was the first commercial growing area in California. Prior to Prohibition, there was more acreage planted to Bordeaux varieties in Livermore Valley than Napa Valley. Even into the 1960s, we outpaced Napa in terms of just acreage of grapes planted.
Really?
First international gold medal ever given to a California wine was Livermore Valley's dry Sauvignon Blanc Semillon blend.
Cool.
So there's a long history of doing really good stuff in Livermore.
Right.
That in 60s, 70s, 80s kind of got sort of funneled into more of a commercial, lower end, good quality, good value, but not high end, not Cabernet, not where we think we can be.
Gotcha.
And hopefully, this is sort of a preface, as it were, to where we're ultimately going to be.
And just real quick, you mentioned that you use all 5 Bordeaux varietals. Just in case some people who are joining us tonight don't know what those 5 varietals are, what are they?
So Cabernet Sauvignon serves as sort of the backbone for Lineage. Anywhere from 63% to 81% in these 4 different offerings.
Cool.
Merlot, Cabernet Franc kind of serve as a middle third of these wines, give it the plushness, give it the kind of raciness of acid for Cabernet Franc kind of through the mouth. Petit Verdot and Malbec are the small percentage, but those are important grapes aromatically for what we're doing.
Because they provide little things that those other varietals don't do, and they help just create more layers and complexities.
That's right.
And of course,
even at 1%, I was pouring in Beverly Hills a couple of weeks ago at a Stars of Cabernet event. We, in the 2010 vintage, has 1% Malbec. And people were saying, 1% Malbec, what can that possibly do? Well, as you know, 1% either way can really change a blend.
Oh, most definitely.
Can add nuances, layers of flavors and aromas and things that you wouldn't have if you didn't have it. So those 2 grapes for me, as much as I love Petit Verdot by itself, it tends to stick its head out of a blend if it's too high a percentage, and that for me is like 3 or 4%.
Okay.
It's not as harmonious as some of the other grapes are. But what it does add is similar to what Malbec adds in terms of this really individualistic kind of fruit component and structural component of the wine that kind of beefs the back end up a bit, and just adds just a sense of complexity to the entire wine that's hopefully breathtaking.
Wow, and we're really going to be able to see those varieties moving through these 4 wines, because we've got some great wines sitting in front of us right now. Like I said, we're starting with 07, your inaugural vintage of this wine. We have the 08, we have the 09, and we have 10.
Yeah.
And 10 is your current release.
It is.
And so being 2013, of course, you're doing that whole lag time, 2 years in barrel, I'd assume, right about?
10 months in bottle, hopefully a year in bottle if we can get to it. But yes,
right on.
That's exactly right.
Well, without further ado, we've already been just talking. We're not even drinking wine, and we all came here to drink wine. So let's get on to the drinking wine. Let's talk about the 07 real quick. And, right out of the glass, it's powerful. This is, we all know it's a great vintage from 07. California, whether it's Napa, Sonoma, Livermore.
Right.
We all look back at 2007. I wasn't here. I was in Virginia doing one of my first vintages. We were talking about it.
Very cool.
But I know it. I've heard about it. I've tasted it, and it's amazing. Wines that come from this vintage are just stellar.
It's interesting. It was proclaimed one of the great vintages of the century, I think, or one of the last 100 years by certain wine writers. And it had all the hallmarks of this amazing vintage in terms of richness, in terms of balance, just the depth of fruit. And that's kind of what led me to believe that Lineage was appropriate to start in that year. Okay. It's a concept that I've been thinking about. My dad and I started the Steven Kent Winery in 1996. And our goal at that point was to make one great Cabernet that we thought could compare with and compete with Cabernet from any part of the world. And when you have a tasting room, people want more than one wine. So we ended up making a bunch of other things. And Cabernet was still the focus, but it wasn't the sole focus. What the Gilmedi Vineyard, our newest state vineyard, allowed us to do, and the 07 vintage allowed us to do, just given the immense quality, the kick-ass quality of that particular vintage, was to make this one statement wine. One wine that says, look, hey, Livermore Valley is a great growing area. We can produce a wine of distinct quality, of individualistic characteristics that will appeal to people who really love wine. And we can be different from Napa Valley, different from Sonoma, different from Bordeaux, but still have a real goal and desire to be up at that level in terms of quality is concerned.
Oh, okay. Careful with that, saying up against Napa Valley. You're in Napa Valley right now.
I'm the Trojan horse, dude, for tonight. I'm happy with that.
We're just happy to have you here. And I'm smelling a lot of these wines just sitting this far back, and even starting with the 07, you've brought some wonderful treats with us, and we're really happy to have them. Now, you mentioned real quick in that last statement, the Statewide Vineyard. Are these a single vineyard wine, or all of the grapes that go into these 5 Bordeaux varietals that you have, are they all from one vineyard?
7, 8, and 9, yes.
Okay.
Gilmedi Vineyard is a vineyard that my partner owns, 64 acres. Planted all 5 of the Bordeaux varieties and several different clones of Cab, a couple different clones of Merlot, Petit Verdot, and some Rhone varieties.
Okay.
Our home ranch is our little 6-acre vineyard around our tasting room that has about 3 acres of Cabernet planted on it. And then we buy some fruit from other vineyards in Livermore Valley, ostensibly to make single vineyard series Cabernets for Steven Kent. Okay. But if they're of the right quality, they might find their way into Lineage.
Okay.
And they did in 10. So the 10 vintage of Lineage has 3 different vineyards of Cabernet in the blend. All the other Bordeaux varieties come only from Gilmedi.
From Gilmedi. Okay, very cool. Yeah. Well, then I'm going to just hold that one right there. And just he's going to be this really, really special thing. And when you're working with these other wines that you produce, do you always look at them with the idea that they are definitely going to have the possibility of ending up in Lineage? Ever since, now that you've kind of moved that direction with the 2010, that's definitely a possibility.
We look, there are kind of over the, as you get to work with a vineyard for a number of years and you find out what parts of the vineyard really perform the best kind of year in and year out. Right. Independent of what the weather was like. In 13, as we talked, kind of a rhapsodically beautiful vintage. Just everything was great about that vintage. Hard to make a bad wine in 13, I think. Okay. In vintages like 11 that were tougher, colder, wetter, that kind of thing. Yeah. The well-tended vineyards, the vineyards that have the right kind of clones planted them, I think still perform better. Okay. Right? So where we are now in 13, we've had to learn kind of from 7 onward in terms of which blocks perform the best, I now have an idea. I think. You know, I go into vintage saying this particular block has every opportunity of being part of Lineage if everything goes well.
Okay.
But it's really kind of a 2-year culling out process once the wines are made. They're barreled down. Right. They go into 4 or 5 different Cooper's barrels. And then we're tasting a lot over the course of, that first 12 months, certainly after ML's done. Right. After malactic's done, the wines are stable. We've sulfured them, they've been racked off and that kind of thing. And they, so they go into the clean barrels. We have a chance to kind of taste them in a situation where they're not changing so dramatically from one day to the next during primary and secondary fermentation, right?
Gotcha.
So it's at that point that I try to taste these wines blind out of barrel, so I don't know whether it's, Francois Frere or Legrand or Terence or what have you. And I start making chalk marks on them, kind of an A barrel or an A minus for a B barrel or a C barrel or what have you. And then over the course of time, we'll cull all of the cab into finer and finer distinctions. So it could be a block that this block performed especially well, so it's potentially part of it. This block certainly didn't perform well enough, so that'll go into something else. And we do the same thing for the other varieties. And then ultimately we get to a point where, we're 18 months into the season, into that particular vintage's élevage and the like. And we've got individual barrel samples on the table. We're tasting blind, trying to figure out, what's the best X number of barrels of cab that we're going to use or what have you. And then we start layering in the other varieties. So it's kind of a cab base first, and then it's layering in the other varieties.
It's building a really strong foundation of Cabernet Sauvignon, really getting that framework up, and then saying, okay, now how do we want to decorate it? What can we hang on that?
Exactly.
And, maybe fill in gaps and
cab's a skeleton, and then all the other neat parts come on top of that.
Exactly. Without a good backbone, no matter how much you try and hang on it, all it's going to do is crumble.
Indeed.
And let's get into that. Let's really start breaking down these wines, because you and I are having a lot of fun talking about different things, but we want to really talk about the wines. And we've actually got some great people here to taste the wines with us. So have you guys both had the 07? Do you need 07? I mean, DDA just walked right in and grabbed the 07. I mean, he's like, I need some wine. I'm going to come in and get it right now.
DDA is the...
Sharing the wealth.
Oh, there you go.
I took your glass. I'm sorry, dear.
Okay.
Well, we'll get you another glass. We'll make sure you have some more wine.
So 07 started out as a 75% cab, 15% Cabernet Franc blend. And then the other 3 varieties were the last 10% of that blend.
Okay.
So Cabernet Franc, we were talking earlier, Cabernet Franc is one of those really beguiling varieties that adds so much in terms of tension and vitality to a blend. Beautiful, redder fruit, more acidity, more drive, more that kind of really, almost indescribable, kind of herbal quality to it that sometimes is like sandalwood and sometimes it's like this fire the second day on a beach kind of thing.
Yeah,
it's just an amazing aromatic experience. And I really, as I've been working through Lineage, I've come to love Cabernet Franc more and more, and like a little bit more the austerity that it brings to the structure of the blends. But in 2007, Cabernet was such a great thing. This particular clone of Cabernet, the C clone, that came from Stag's Leap, or from a vineyard here in Stag's Leap in the 50s, it kind of performs best for us. So it's kind of the first thing I look at is, here's the foundation for Lineage. Let's hope that we don't screw things up in the cellar.
Right.
And let's hope that we have enough to kind of make the kind of volume of Lineage that we want to make. And then we might add other clones depending upon how the blind blending process goes.
Right.
But in 7, it was about trying to create a wine that has some, has really beautiful depth to it, has this really neat aromatic punch to it.
Oh, definitely has punch.
It was relatively low in alcohol, just over 14% in alcohol. So none of these wines are 15%. They're all sort of 14 to 14.6 or something like that. But it was more about balance, more about elegance and beauty, trying to make a wine that had ageability to it, had really nice balancing acid to it, but that was sexy, that was tasty, that was, God, what am I smelling? I think I'm getting that, but now I'm getting something else, something that would, draw you back to the glass again and again.
No, and it's great that you bring that up, because in the time that you and I have sat here, we've already got 15 minutes through, a quarter of the way through the show. We're still in the first wine. It's really gone through layers for me. When I first sat down right after we poured all these glasses and you smell them, you're getting big, huge punch in your face things. And now those are kind of settling down. And now you're really starting to see the different layers on it. And it's got great structure to it. It's got that acidity you were talking about. And with any red wine, you need that acidity.
Absolutely.
But it's also got a beautiful tannin structure to it. It's really mouth-filling. And what's already appealing to me about these wines is the sheer texture of them.
Thank you.
I love red wines that don't have that donut hole.
Right.
They have huge, big tannins. They don't forget about their acid, but they maybe forgot to fill in something in between. And I can already tell you right now that this is
Thank you very much.
amazing. What are you guys thinking about these wines?
Well, I'm getting into how much more floral the 08 is over
Come up to
the
the
07.
table.
Yep. Come on,
Yeah, hey.
right here. Come on, hop in.
So
So you're already on the 08.
we're only on the 08. We enjoyed the 07 a lot, but immediately it strikes you that the 08 has a much stronger floral component to it, which is something that I like to look for in my Bordeaux blends.
It's really interesting because I associate that the floral aspect of this with a couple things. It could be Petit Verdot, which has a really, for me, a big violet and lavender kind of component to it aromatically. Yes. Also with Cabernet Franc. This particular blend traded Cabernet Franc for Cabernet Sauvignon. So we went from 75% to 81%. And that 6% came right off the top of the Cabernet Franc. Everything else remained the same in terms of percentages. But, the growing year was very different too. To me, 8, when it first started out, was a more austere year. It wasn't quite the sort of as voluptuous as 07 was. It was a warm year, but it had more temperature spikes in Livermore Valley than 7 did, which was pretty much as kind of hedonically wonderful as you could get, in terms of that temperateness and stability of temperature. We never got a lot of this kind of thing happening. 105 down, it was, right
solid all the way through,
in that sweet spot. It's interesting you say, though, Rich. I've had the occasion to taste these wines in vertical recently a number of times, and I was worried about 8 before we released it. It was coming on the heels of 7, which was so big and voluptuous, and 8 was kind of austere and kind of hiding behind the table or dad's leg or whatever for a lot of its barrel time. But now it may be my favorite of the 4. So right now at this point in time, and there's a for me, this wine has it has a cohesiveness to it that I really like a lot, from entry all the way through to finish. And a long, nice finish, I think, is similar to the other 3 wines. But there's just a cohesive quality of the wine that I really like a lot, and that I think bodes well for how well the wine's going to age and and the complexity that's going to show over the course of time. It's just it's funny. Sometimes you presuppose certain vintages are going to be better than others, and they end up being, at least at certain parts of its life, the star of the show.
Every wine, once it's been produced, goes through a very different life cycle. We've talked about on this show before, where even once it gets into the bottle, that bottle is going to take on its own life.
No question.
And that trajectory of that life is completely different. I mean, you've had enough verticals and lineups that you can see from here to there where that changes. And if you catch a particular vintage at that right time, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a better vintage, but if you catch, it's going to be amazing. Right. And then that one's going to have its life cycle finished, and now you're going to move on to other vintages and things like that.
What do you find the difference between those first two wines to be? I mean, kind of the major difference to you.
Well, first of all, the nose is more intense on the 08, whereas the back end of the palate seems longer on the 07.
Okay.
Cool. Interesting.
So we're looking at an aromatic structure versus more of a backbone and of a weight structure between the two.
Yeah, interesting. Interesting.
Cool.
Thanks.
And 7 is kind of a slugger.
Yeah, still swinging away. There's no question.
Excuse me, let me let you guys get back to this. Thanks for counting me in.
We want to make sure that everybody gets in. It's not just going to be you and I sitting here.
We're getting tired of talking to ourselves, I think.
No, and we're hoping we got to get more people involved in this. We want to make sure that everybody signs in and starts the conversation going. We want to get as many people asking questions because it could just be you and I sitting here getting drunk on a bunch of really good wine. Which
So I'm gonna make this bold statement, and then all of you people out there from Napa Valley can disagree with me. Livermore Valley is absolutely as capable of making great Bordeaux blends as Napa, and maybe better in some ways.
Oh boy!
So I've thrown the gauntlet down.
I like it.
For all you Napa people out there, tell me I'm wrong. Let's talk about why I'm not.
That's a challenge.
That is, I'm throwing the gauntlet down.
Challenge accepted. We definitely need to get some.
Challenge accepted.
Let's get some Napa Valley people on.
It is the diurnal temperature.
Let's get some Napa Valley people in here and let's start getting some questions going. And while they're not around, I'm gonna have to be that guy.
Please.
Okay, so
Please.
challenge accepted.
You're here.
I'm here. Let's make this right. And we're talking about the 08. 08 was my first vintage in the valley, so I'm glad we can start talking about that. And I know exactly what you mean when you talk about the spikes. I remember coming up from the East Coast, and I remember living out here and just, loving the weather comparatively and not having to deal with the humidity anymore and the thunderstorms. But at the same time, I couldn't get my head around how one day it was 105 degrees and the next day it was 85 degrees. And then it was 40 degrees at night. So I can definitely understand that. But let's start talking about hillsides versus valley floor. I mean, because when you think about Napa, at least I do, as being, three distinct parts. I think of the valley floor running from Napa all the way up to Calistoga, and I think of the two mountain ranges. I think of the Vaca mountain ranges that has Atlas Peak and Hell Mountain. I think of the Mayacamas that has, Mount Veeder, Spring Mountain, Diamond Mountain, and the utilization of all those different growing areas and how they really build out these wines. What does Livermore have on that? I mean, I'm going to say that right now is what Napa has.
That's a tough thing to compete with, I think, in terms of, when I talk to people about Napa Valley versus Livermore, Livermore's a bowl and Napa Valley's is V. Livermore is a valley, but it starts at 500 feet above sea level. So it's not sea level, it's higher than that. And it goes to about 1,000 feet at this point in time. Our upper end of Gilmedi Vineyard's 960 feet above sea level.
Okay.
We have Petit Verdot growing. So we do get that effective elevation. We get that kind of, it's not gigantic, but it's meaningful. You get that temperature, every 1,000 feet you go up, you lose a degree centigrade in temperature. So that does mean something. And the way that this particular vineyard in the eastern foothills of Livermore is situated, it's kind of rectangular, but it's like a tablecloth with a hole with, the middle pressed down.
Right.
It kind of goes down on both sides to this arroyo that runs through it. So you have all these really neat variations in terms of how the aspect of particular blocks of vineyard.
Okay.
So they're not all oriented the same way, which means that they're going to get the effects of sunlight, the effects of wind in different ways. And we're not going to get that dramatic kind of tannin build you might get in mountain fruit.
Okay.
We have a lot of different soil types. We have 6 different soil types kind of running through the Gilmedi Vineyard, from, very almost adobe-like clay at the very top of the vineyard to very fine, loamy soil at the bottom end of the vineyard. And each of these soils, and that we could talk for hours about what that really means, but in terms of water retention and heat retention, it's probably more meaningful than anything else. We're not talking about chalky soils. We're not talking about volcanic soils in Livermore. We're talking about gradations between stuff that holds a lot of water or that's very cold in the springtime and pushes really, really late compared to other parts. And then other parts of the vineyard that are very light soil, drain extremely well. There's some old river bed stuff, the rivers that don't exist there in Livermore anymore, but have left, gravel 600 feet deep in the valley. It's kind of called the Grave of California. It's so rocky there in some parts of the area, of the valley that it really serves well for getting rid of too much rainfall, draining really well and radiating heat from all that rock too.
It's fantastic. And where is Livermore Valley? Just real quick.
That's a good question.
Because we're sitting here, we're in Napa, and we're talking about the difference between the two.
Yeah.
But just to give our viewers an idea, where is Livermore?
So Livermore Valley is about 35 miles east and slightly south of San Francisco. So if you're on the Bay Bridge coming east on 580, you'll get to Livermore in about 45 minutes.
Okay.
It's 25 miles north of San Jose and about the same distance south of Oakland.
Okay.
So it's a true Bay Area appellation. One of the neat things about the valley, though, and what makes it, I think, as great a place to grow Bordeaux varieties as it is, it's one of the few valleys in California that's east-west oriented.
Really?
And
true east-west.
True east-west oriented. So the notches in the hillsides on the bay allow the air to flow through every afternoon. So the diurnal temperature range in Livermore is dramatic. So where we average 88 degrees during the growing season, we'll drop by 30 degrees at night. So we're in the 50s. That's where you get your acid retention. That's where you get your ability to grow really balanced fruit.
Mm-hmm.
And outside of Santa Ynez Valley, I think it's probably the only other one in California that's this east-west orientation that really allows for that cooling effect to give you the balance.
Gotcha.
So it's not Central Valley. It's a Central Coast appellation aligned, very, very similar to sort of temperature-wise to Mid-Napa Valley, to St. Helena, basically. Fewer degree days, actually, than St. Helena.
Really? So slightly cooler in the sense of degree days, and that's when we think about winemaking.
Right.
Just the amount of sunlight that we're going to be working with comparatively to rain days and things like that.
It's really a lot about how things differ from your daytime temperatures to your evening temperatures, and the ability for you to ripen your fruit and then also to cool it down at night so that you're retaining that acid in the fruit. You're not bleeding it out in high temperatures.
Exactly. All right, so we got to move on. We got to keep going. We still got 2 more wines to finish, and they're just you can really start to see now with the 09 that it's very cohesive. We're looking at your work. This is kind of your experimentation. This is your Frankenstein, and it is a Frankenstein, and it's a beautiful monster. But gosh, it's a monster. Now with the 2008, I could see you backing off a little bit more and kind of going, okay, I did that. We're working within the vintage. We're gonna have a little bit more fun. But now with this 2009, I can already tell you, you're in your stride. And how did you feel with that vintage? And what are we looking at with this wine?
I thought 09 was another great vintage. I thought that it was a cooler vintage than kind of was the first of a string of 9, 10, and 11 that was really cooler than average. But it didn't rain during harvest, so we had a nice long growing season. For us, it was a really produced some really voluptuous fruit. The big difference here is kind of this segue between 8 and 9, in that 9 is 63% Cabernet and 27% Merlot. So it was the ability then to kind of get that middle third or that last third kind of dialed into I think a beautiful combination of Merlot and Cabernet Franc.
Okay.
Which does great work in the right bank, obviously, in Saint-Emilion and Pomerol and the like. But it was a way to still have all the framework, that skeleton that Cabernet Sauvignon gives you, but then to really be able to overlay some really kind of racy, the plushness of Merlot, but that raciness of Cabernet Franc again.
Definitely.
And this was also a vintage that kind of allowed us to separate ourselves from the reserve Cabernet we were doing on the Steven Kent label,
right? And
really kind of focus Lineage on being its own thing. And that's kind of 60 to 65% Cab, big middle, 30+% of Merlot and Cab Franc, and a little teensy bit of the last two.
Right, but the Merlot really definitely comes through on this one, and I'm absolutely loving it. I mean, this is really now more about the fruit.
Yes.
Now we're looking about structure here. We're looking at floral here. Right. This is fruit.
This is just pure, unapologetic. Unapologetic about that. Exactly.
So, do we have you want to come up and talk about your 2009? Have you had it yet?
I have a good question.
Yeah.
Lineage is about the blending.
It is.
What is your favorite? Do you like a 100% varietals or blending wine? And why would you go to blend rather than showcasing one varietal?
I think that wines that have the right number of parts to them, that's more than one part, are ones that end up being more complex and end up being able to show a real evolution in the wine, in the tasting experience, in the wine in the mouth, in terms of vitality, in terms of, and that's an important word for me, is texture. For me, and I don't know if you're the same way when you're making wine, but for me, texture is probably more important than aroma and flavor, at least early on.
Yes.
In terms of what you're trying to capture, mouthfeel, tannin quality, length of tannin, richness of tannin, polish of tannin, all these kinds of things. It's really about tannin ultimately, and how it's expressed. If you trust your vineyard and you know that your vineyard is a great vineyard, which I believe these vineyards are. It really then becomes an exercise in how do I shape this thing? How do I use what nature gave me and what the vineyard gave me that year in as kind of authentic and natural way as possible to make this, to help me paint this picture that I have in my mind about what this vintage can be. And it's not about trying to, screw things into unnatural shapes. It's about how do I use each varietal to its best effect, at least as far as my own personal view is concerned, because that's all I have to go on, right? It would be arrogant to believe that I know what you want from a wine or what Aaron wants or what Rich wants. It's all about what do I think makes the most beautiful wine possible, the most elegant wine, the wine that's going to live the longest and be the most interesting and complex for people, and make it and actually and hopefully have the fruit and the skill and experience to bring that to life. That's ultimately what it's about for me.
And ultimately, you also have to like the wine you make.
Absolutely.
Because if nobody buys it, you're gonna have to drink it
an awful lot. Yeah, we don't. We're a real small producer, so we don't. We don't have enough fruit nor enough time and energy to try to make wine for every grocery store shelf. It's more about, hey, let's try to find people who like what we like and bring them into the family.
How much of this do you make, actually?
Well, that's a good question. We're about 150 cases in the 2010 vintage. We'll be 250 cases in 11, about 400 cases in 12. So we're able now finally to.
Wow. So you're doing a pretty much of a J curve. Is there a cap? We talked about 5 barrels here, and now we're getting up to almost 20 barrels. Yeah. Is 20 barrels going to be kind of the round number, maybe, or
the vineyard, Gilmetti Vineyard itself would allow me to do about 1,000 cases.
Oh wow!
Given kind of the percentages that we're working with now. 60 to 65% Cabernet and 20% Cabernet Franc, that kind of thing. That's assuming every barrel, makes it into the final blend, which it never does. So, kind of ultimately, at least for the foreseeable future, we're kind of, in that 500 to 1,000 case range as being our upper limit right now.
Right. You'd like to make 500 cases. You could theoretically make 1,000, and we're just going to go with
that. I want people to love the wine. I want people to say, for every great experience we have in our lives with kids getting married, new babies, whatever, we want to serve Lineage at that occasion. That's the only thing.
Well, there you go. We're definitely going to have Lineage with that. And, I'm really enjoying this 08. And like I said, when I first tasted it, it's really starting, 09, showing you coming into your own. The 07 was your Frankenstein, was you building something, seeing how it could all work together. And it's beautiful in that sense. The 08 is kind of correcting in another direction, kind of saying, okay, how can we work with this way? We've got a very different vintage than 07, so we're going to have to adjust there. And now you've hit your stride with this wine. Thank you. And your family's been making wine for 6 generations, so you guys know how to make wine.
We're trying. I mean, every year is a different experience, as you know, and every year offers, one more page in this book you get to write as a winemaker. And, I'm getting up to a point now where I start thinking about, how many more vintages I have, and you're never going to get enough, obviously. And I'm trying to make something that is as true to what the place and the year gives you to work with.
Couldn't say that better.
And if I do that and that's what I accomplish, that's ultimately, I'm happy with that. We love for the wines to be in the great restaurants around the world, and for the people who are really passionate about these kinds of wines to have them perfect. But ultimately, it comes down to how close can I get to that ultimate, that ideal wine I have in my mind. That's what I'm working toward, and every year just offers a whole new set of challenges, which is just it's an amazing.
They do though, don't
it's
they?
An amazing thing. It's just it's such an extraordinary business, and it's what this allows you to do is marry whatever rational bent you might have as a person, your desire to kind of put your parentheses, your arms around what it is you're doing, but also to express what it is that makes you sing, that makes that creates a kind of poetic resonance in you that that you don't necessarily share with other people per se out loud, but when you're by yourself, you say, man, this is something that's gorgeous. This is something that's beautiful. That's emotional. That's what winemaking and what that whole process is about to me.
And you and I were talking about that earlier when we were just hanging out and talking about how sometimes when we're making wine, and you were explaining to me how this is made in 1.7 ton bins. So they use not big, large stainless steel tanks like some wineries do, where they're constantly having to do these pump overs, where they actually really use bins to manage the size of the fermentation. Really allows you to get in there by hand, mixing the must, getting the fruit and the juice back and forth to really get that nice extraction and things like that. And when you have that time to really sit there by hand and you're punching down and you're getting the aromatics, being released with the CO2 and you licking your fingers occasionally because it smells so good, it tastes so good. That little bit is the way maybe some writers will sit down with their notebooks, and it may not be a poem or something that they're going to publish, but it's something that they're writing about. And that, as far as winemakers go and as far as this, that is your ultimate notes. Those are your fun moments.
Absolutely.
That you eventually, and you're doing such a great job, get to take all those little bits of notes that you're sitting there and you're committing to memory over the course of harvest and course of fermentations and secondary and barrel aging, and you then get to put them together.
Right. So, right.
Okay, let's go on to the 2010 here. Unless we have any 09 quotes.
Well, for me, for the
Come on, you
moment,
gotta come on.
Okay, sure, okay.
If you're gonna talk about it, you gotta get up.
Sure. For me, for the moment, I think I'm sticking with Steven's observation that the 08 may be in the lead at the moment in the life range of this lineage. That it may be that later the 09 will step ahead of the 08, but it needs that extra time to bring the truth out.
Very good.
And
Are you seeing a lot of the Merlot come through on this in the flavor profile, or what are you seeing as a profile of this wine comparatively to the 7, the 8? What is the 09 looking like for you?
Well, I'm picking up the Cabernet Franc.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm picking that up more than I'm getting the Merlot at this moment, but later on the Merlot could show a lot more strength.
I get the Merlot structurally. I think that the plushness that you mentioned, I think is definitely there. It's the roundness, and I have obviously the experience of knowing what the Merlot was like in barrel by itself. And say, God, those 4 barrels of Merlot are freaking amazing. I can't wait to get that into the blend and see what it does. So, it was more of a structural thing, I think, than it was a flavor component at that time. But I think that it's beginning to open up, and you get more of that kind of plummy, fruit and dark cherry kind of notes that I associate with, and a little slight herbal quality that I associate with Merlot.
Right.
But it's I think ultimately what you want with wines like this is you want a kind of seamless marriage of the varieties, so that you're not necessarily saying, well, I can get the Cabernet Franc or the Malbec or the Merlot in that. I think that's probably less successful than saying, wow, that blend is just harmonious.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Hits your palate, hits you on finish. Yeah.
How frequently do you show off the vertical, maybe like, say, people coming into your tasting room?
Well, thank you for the plug, by the way. We in the month of October, we showed the Lineage vertical on the weekends to people who came and made reservations in our taste room, sat down, and we went through the wines with people who came, and everyone seemed to like the wines a lot. There's not a lot of some of these wines left, the library selections at this point in time, but with 11 and 12's volumes going up a little bit, or dramatically J-curve like, just off a real small base, but it gives you an opportunity of showing the wine to more people.
Well, I really liked a lot something that maybe you didn't intend to show me, but it was apparent one day when I came out to taste wines with you. There was a bunch of people. There was a bunch of people from San Jose. A table of about 8 people.
Yeah.
And you were showing off the barrel tastes of 2 years of Pinot Meunier.
Oh, Pinot Meunier.
And there was one lady from San Jose who didn't seem like she was going to leave the place if you didn't somehow sell her a bottle of barrel tasting Pinot Meunier.
Yeah. Yes.
I had to disappoint her just for legal reasons.
I'm sorry, I can't do it right now.
But that was a lot of fun. I was thinking, is that still happening, that you're doing barrel tasting in vertical format?
That was one of those kind of odd situations, like when I was actually next door where our cellar is,
Yes.
working on stuff, and I had some things I wanted some of my people to taste, and they were excited. I love excited people who are excited about wine, and an empty glass is like the perfect combination. So that's how that whole thing worked out. It's not something that's on the schedule normally, but
it could be.
It could be. I mean, I think the thing that's wonderful about wine is that it's at its best when you're sharing it with somebody who really likes.
And when customers are able to tell you what they want, and you're in a position to somehow facilitate that, that's a happy situation
absolutely.
to be in.
It's feedback is always great, positive and negative. So it's always nice to be able to. It's close. We're going to get to a Broadway opening, right?
There you go.
They tell you what you.
All right.
Okay, so let's move on.
We gotta
Move over.
Okay, Susan.
We have a question from Russell and Sherry, who are homesick, and they're watching you.
Sorry to hear that.
They can't be on camera because they feel like they look terrible. You look beautiful. We can see you. Hey.
Just look at me, for God's sakes. I'm sure you're fabulous.
So Russell sent me a multi-part question.
Wonderful.
And I'll just let you guys. It says, can he explain the bends to ferment? Just open the. I don't know what this means.
Okay.
So I'm just going to read what he said. Can he explain the bends to ferment? Just open tubs. When does he move to barrels? How long in the bend? Unless he has already talked about that.
We haven't. I'd be happy. Yeah, real briefly. As we were talking earlier, we do all of our fermentations in small batches, basically 1.5 tons, 1.7 tons of fruit in a plastic bin surrounded by a wooden frame. And we do a lot of cold soaking early on to kind of get, for us, it's about native flora and allowing them to do whatever they're going to do fermentation wise, which, is 2% alcohol, basically, and then they die off.
Now, what would you, when you, just real quick, when you say cold soaking?
So we bring the fruit in the morning when it's cold, and we put it through the stemmer, and then we'll put it into the fermentation bins. And usually what we'll do is we'll put them into either a really cold room at like 20 degrees, or it'll go into the cellar, which is cold at 50 or something like that. And it will just sit. We don't use sulfur at the crush pad. We'll inoculate. We do all inoculations. So we don't do native yeast fermentation. We do native starts basically, but we will inoculate with specific yeast strains, kind of over the top of the skins. Let them sit 4, 5, 6 days. Cap starts to crack. We start punching down then. Whatever came in out of the grapes have already done what they're going to do. Now it's about getting primary fermentation really kind of going. They're in bins. We taste these bins every day, especially when we get to a point where we're sort of 12% sugar, and lower. Then we're starting to taste every day, making really evaluative notes about texture and about tannin builds and all that kind of stuff, until we're negative bricks, and then we're thinking about extended maceration and what effect that might have on tannin and the development of tannin and that sort of thing. Generally speaking, we're in bin for 14 to 21 days, let's say. Okay, kind of all told.
So your fruit, the actual grapes, are in contact with the juice,
right?
Ultimately turning that juice that comes in clear red,
right?
And we're going to be getting all the flavors out of them. You're really going to get as much extraction as you can, tannins from the skins and the seeds and everything.
Punching down 2 to 3 times a day.
2 to 3 times a day.
Yeah.
And that time frame is usually for you guys going to be about.
That time frame is, let's say, 14 days, including the cold soak time.
Including the cold soak.
The primary fermentation happens really rapidly. This year it did because it was kind of a warmer year.
Right.
So it had happened pretty rapidly. And then it's really about texture. It's about, so every day we're digging into the skins, and when the cap drops, and sometimes it does, we're just tasting juice off the top or whatever, trying to figure out, where it was yesterday, where it is today, where it might be tomorrow based upon past experience, and then eventually drawing the free run off and then pressing. So it could be anywhere from 14 days to 35 days as it has been in the past. But this year we tended to press off earlier. We pressed off, 14 to 18 days because I wanted to maintain some tannin. There was just so much fruit this year, the fruitiness of the must and eventually the wine early on, that it was, for me, it was, let's get it off now. I like
Okay.
where we are with the shape of things.
You
And
weren't worried about having to build any more structure. They had
No,
more than enough
they had-
muscle.
exactly.
It wasn't about, yeah.
I don't want to, it's not supposed to be too brawny. It's supposed to be appropriately muscled. Let's
There you
just
go.
say.
There you go.
No
Lean,
steroids.
limber, there we go.
No performance enhancing drugs in these wines.
And all right, let's get into this. Let's get into our
Thanks for the
2010.
question.
Great question, Russell, Sherry. And feel better. Seriously.
Cheers.
Drink some wine. You'll
Drink
be
some
fine.
wine.
Okay, so as far as the wines are concerned, last but not least, we've got to get into this 2010,
Yeah.
which is your current release. Before I've even tasted the 2010, what are some notes that I need to think about going into this after now having experienced your first 3 vintages?
10, very, very light year in terms of yields.
Okay.
Rained right as we're picking Cabernet. So where we're looking to harvest, 25 bricks, let's say, 24 and a half to 25 and a half. Started raining October 17th or 18th, whatever that day was, at about 23 bricks.
Oh, wow.
Some of the stuff we were able to get off early that had kind of gotten to where we wanted to be flavor-wise. It's never really just about sugar. It's about balance of acid, and then we'll look at TAs and pHs and stuff like that. But ultimately, it's about how things taste, right?
In learning, I've worked with some really great winemakers who've taught me a lot in the years, and I worked with 2 last year that could not have taught me anything better than work by your numbers, see what your sugar levels are, and see what your acid levels are, and once you've hit those numbers, ignore them.
Right.
Do nothing but taste.
Right.
And until you're walking through that vineyards and you're tasting that fruit and you have that flavor profile from the fruit,
Right.
the numbers don't matter.
Right.
You could, or if in some cases you might be tasting the fruit and you might be numbers, then you can kind of skew it a little bit. But really, it's always about the flavor. It's in some cases it's great popsicles that you might be looking after, or it might just be great soda.
Exactly right. I mean, they're confirmatory in a sense. The numbers are. When I'm walking in a vineyard, and I know that we've done, we're in the 23 and a half, 24 range. You're tasting more for flavors, for skin maturity, for the texture of the skin, for the brownness of the seeds, for how cleanly the seeds pull from the pulp, all those kind of things. How much tannin when you just take the skin, and just chew that, how tannic is that skin. Those are kind of the things that we're looking for. And we ultimately make the call based upon how it feels that day, how it tastes that day.
Right.
And we know the numbers are in a range that works for us. Then we'll pull the plug on, let's go ahead and harvest now. Let's do it now. Let's get it in. And we do the same thing for everything. For pressing off, another one of the more, really important decisions in the wine life is when do you press stuff off? You can look at numbers, and if you go by sugar, you have a lot of unripe tasting wine ultimately, right? Because phenolic ripeness is different than sugar ripeness, and there's these different ripeness curves throughout the course of the season. So it's ultimately by texture and taste and aromas, and this trying to get to a point where what you're tasting in bin doesn't differ really a whole lot from day to day, and then you're kind of in that sweet spot. Let's go ahead and press.
I mean, and this is really where the artistic aspect of winemaking comes in. You have to understand the science. You have to be able to utilize the science, but ultimately that flavor profile, that understanding of working with the vineyards and working with the fruit and the wines, it comes down to an artistic decision.
There's no question about it.
And now in utilizing that information, how can we approach 2010? You're talking about the sugars were starting to come down. You're picking in the rain. Well, what kind of flavors are we looking at because of that?
Well, again, we're sort of 65% Cabernet, and we're 16% Cabernet Franc, 15% Merlot. So we got really that true balance in that middle third that I'm always looking for. So for me, 10 is a more austere vintage than 9 was because of Cabernet Franc.
Okay.
Because that acid quality of Cabernet Franc that I'm always looking for that vitality, for that sense of aliveness and litheness that you get from Cabernet Franc, that moves that wine through your mouth in a really energetic, beautiful way. And I think 10 shows that. I don't think it's as voluptuous a wine as 9.
Okay.
I think it's a little bit more austere is the wrong word. It's shaded a little bit. It still needs some time. It's a really young wine still, obviously. But I really love what this wine does in the mouth. And I think that based upon the acidity on the finish and the length. The wine's going to age really beautifully for a long time, I think.
Oh, it's got wonderful structure. It's got beautiful mouth-filling tannins, and they're not just direct tannins. You're not just getting them around your teeth, and you're not just getting them on your gums. You're getting them all the way through, all the way back, and there's this great acid wash coming back through. It's a beautiful wine, and we have to make sure Didier gets some because, as you can see, you and I are just hogging it. and honestly, I'm a huge fan of wine that's had age on it, and I love even older wines. But sometimes there's something really, really bright and wonderful about young wines, and this, being your current release and being so bright, is really a whole lot of fun. It's spritey, it bounces around a lot. You know that it's got so many places to go in the coming years, but it's so much fun right now. Why do you think that is? Why is it so much fun right now?
Well, I think that I hope it's because blending decisions were made well. That we got the right kind of mix of the things that allow for that sprightliness and that kind of bouncing quality, for what I would call that liveliness and liveness of Cabernet Franc in particular. And I think that overall, though, the vintage, we didn't get quite as much sugar as we got in Cabernet, for instance, as we got in 09 or in any of the other vintages for that matter. And they just, I think, seem to work really well together right now. And I think that there's a lot of room for this wine to evolve, to go to other levels, to marry even more. For me, on the finish, wood's a little bit obvious right now. But I think that with some time in bottle is going to go away, and
yes,
we're going to continue to get that length through the wine. And I just, it's neat to be able to taste these wines kind of in this format, because it's while every wine is a different experience and it very much weather related kind of a thing, each wine for me is sort of a one page in this book that you get to write as a winemaker, right? And it does show evolution of thought, and it shows a evolution of purpose and an evolution of a clarity, or hopefully a clearing up of what it is that you're trying to accomplish as the winemaker. And you get closer and closer to this truth, whatever that ends up
but
being.
you can really see that, and it's how, and I want to continue that metaphor that I was talking about earlier with, the 08 being your Frankenstein, the 09 kind of, or excuse me, 7 being your Frankenstein, 08 backing off a little bit, 09 you're really starting to hit stride, 10, this wine, you know this wine. You've now come to terms with what this wine is going to be. It's going to just be continually moving forward. You've decided. It's great to really be able to get to see wines in their beginning stages. Yeah. Sometimes you sit down with verticals and you're seeing a snippet, a shot. This wine's been around for this many years. You're seeing little things. So you're only seeing small wine. To be able to sit down with these 4 wines and see it from its, inception right here. And then, okay, we're going to work on a little bit more. And now with this 2010, now we're really seeing where this wine is going to go. And we're really going to see great things in the next years with the 2011, the 2012. And now we're finally sleeping from the 2013. It's just our last few minutes before we have to wrap up, since we've made it through all 4 wines. Where do you see Lineage going, and how is it going to be ultimately part of your family's legacy?
I think that at this point in time, there's still a lot of work. I mean, these are relatively young vineyards that we're working with.
Okay.
So, Gilmetti is 13 or 14 years old at this point in time.
So it's just warming up.
Just beginning to kind of hit its stride. There's a lot that we're going to learn as a winemaker, what I'm going to learn as a winemaker from what the vineyard gives us over the course of time. Ultimately, we're trying to make wines that continually surprise people and attract people and give people things to think about, as their 7 ages in their cellar, and they're now in the 14, 15, 16 vintages.
Right, and they're putting them away for their kids and things like that. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And just personally, I hopefully continue to move toward this ideal picture, this idealized wine I have in my own head about, what for me, what would be the ultimate expression of what it is I want to accomplish as a winemaker. Maybe that changes every year. So maybe you're always as far away from it as you were this year.
Right, because every year you maybe see a little bit more.
That's right.
So this year you saw that much and you got that far, but then the next year you see a little bit more. Well, and it's,
Yeah, and the surprise you get from year to year is a wonderful thing too.
Totally.
You always should embrace that part of it as well.
So what am I looking at? If I really want to start going back through a vertical like this, and I'm thinking, man, I love these wines and I want to have them for my lineage, for my kid, What do I have to pay for them? What do I have to?
So on release, these wines are $145 a bottle.
Okay.
2007 now being a library wine with small amount available, it's $205 a bottle.
Okay.
And the 8 is $185.
Okay.
And the 9 is $165. So kind of
Gotcha.
there's a $20
yep.
kind of
I
with
see
each
exactly where
successive
you're going with
vintage
that.
kind of a thing. So these are wines that are available from the winery. We do have a set of people who are already kind of in tune to what we're doing, who are our greatest resource. The thing that they allow me to sleep a little bit at night, and even our Lineage collectors are friends and family, people who have been club members at Steven Kent, who get a 6-pack of wine every year, and their price will be $810 a 6-pack for the 2011 vintage. So it'll be $135 a bottle, whatever that equals up to be. And then if there are single bottles available for non-collectors, those will be at a higher price.
Okay, so I know that it's a little bit of something that I'm gonna have to maybe put a few dollars away for, and maybe take that extra that I got from overtime working with clients for harvest. But it is not astronomical. We're not looking at something crazy.
No, it's not.
It really shows what work that was put into these wines were, and obviously it's been a great amount of wine. In just talking with you for this last hour and hearing about vintage after vintage, you've just put an amazing amount of work into each one of these wines. You're truly committed to the soil, to the vineyard, and of course that's where wine starts and where it has to come from. But you also pay great attention to detail in crafting each one year after year. I'm really just happy to have been able to share these with you and hang out for the last hour.
You too, Sean. Absolutely.
Really thankful to have some great guests here talking about the wine. Thanks so much for being here.
I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
And thank you to ToutSuite Social Club for actually putting this little tasting together.
Absolutely.
We're really happy to be able to taste a great lineup of wines, and happy to work with Susan Quinn and Didier Listau, and look forward to seeing you guys the next time. And hopefully we'll get a little bit more conversation going and talking about Napa and talking about wines. And thank you guys so much for being here.
All right.
Cheers.